name is Holly Mandelkern. I've been a teacher for many years. I've worked as a librarian, and I'm also a poet. The book that I wrote is called Beneath White Stars, Holocaust Profiles in Poetry. And it's a book of poetic tributes to individuals involved with the Holocaust as survivors, rescuers, resistors, and it's illustrated with pen and ink portraits drawn by Byron Marshall. He brings illustrative techniques from the time. For example, for Peter Gintz, who was also an artist, he has tried to draw in a similar way that Peter drew. And I think Byron's done a marvelous job of bringing them to life. My father was a lead bombardier and a prisoner of war in Germany during World War II. And in the camp where he was stationed, Stalag Luft III, approximately a third of the prisoners of war were Jews. So through his story, I began a deeper study of the Holocaust, and combined with my interest in history and poetry, I decided to bring these disciplines together. And I felt that poetry was a way to gently introduce the reader to some very remarkable individuals who displayed an enormous amount of courage. Today I gave a talk about Abraham Sotzkaver, who was a poet and partisan from Vilna, Lithuania. In all humility, I'd like to read you now one of the poems that I wrote to honor him. In the silence of the night, I rise to stanzas of his light, the spine of stars, Orion's belt, a glowing ring of what he felt. Stars knew of Egypt's famined grain, like words restored in sheaves again. His fallen star, a newborn child, could live through him when strophes were styled. Whitened stars fell into tears as meter marked his earthly fears. He wished for embryonic times when stars were watered by his rhyme. From afar he sang of dust, the steady stars a heart could trust. The candles counted heaven's space, cantillations at his pace. I hope that I was able to shed light on the great wonder and beauty that he was able to share through his poetic work and through his work in the ghetto to inspire and motivate young people to want to stay alive. I've started the book by writing about life under normal circumstances. Helen Frank going to the park with her family, holding a rabbit, and then rather dramatically, life changed for them. In writing about people who resisted, I began with a poem about people who wrote under the most adverse circumstances you could imagine. And then there was a young boy named Peter Gintz who was from Prague. He was truly a child prodigy. He had already written 5 books by the time he was 14. He continued to write in the camp of Terezin. He also organized a journal that came out every week. He was the editor. I've also written about Helen Greenspun, who is a local survivor. Helen has been able to go out and talk to tens of thousands of school children in our area, and I was so inspired by her story. She came from a large family. Her parents and 2 younger siblings were killed right away, but 5 members of her family lived, and that's a rather remarkable story in itself.
Yeah. I like it.
All right.
What did you? I don't know the outfit what I wear.
The star around here.
And you know about this dress. In the DP camp, we didn't have clothes. Yeah. And me and my sister Regina, we were fighting about this dress.
Helen believes that loving and respecting people can truly change the world. Today it was a privilege to watch Helen see the drawings of herself in 1946 and also the more modern Helen. I think she was very pleased with the drawings. I think she felt it reflected who she is. That made me feel very happy because she has said many times, I won't be here forever and I want my story to be known. And I think that she felt that this is another way of capturing her story.
Holly, you did such a marvelous job, and I love you. It's special for me. This is very important.
In my book, I've tried to honor rescuers as well. I wrote about Chiune Sugihara, who was a Japanese diplomat working in Kovno, Lithuania, who, despite the wishes of the Japanese government, wrote 2,139 visas to save the lives of Jews who had fled primarily from Poland and were desperate to get out of that area of Europe. In addition, I've written about Father Bruno, Henry Rendiers, who was a Belgian priest who rescued several hundred Jewish children. I had the privilege to meet a woman, Flora Singer, who was rescued by him, and I met her at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and we were by the rescuer's wall, and she leaned forward and kissed his name on the wall and said he was a saint to her. Another really interesting story to me was a story that I read about in Sports Illustrated, the story of Ben Helfgott. While he was at work one day, most of the members of his town were taken away. And when he returned to his town, all he saw floating in the air were feathers that had been released from the pillows and bed covers. He was taken to several camps, and he spent quite a bit of time in the camp of Terezin. Conditions there were, of course, very, very harsh. By the end of the war, he was still alive, but he was a scant 80 pounds. He watched weight trainers, and he was so excited to see people doing that he ran out and said, "I can do this too," and he showed the coach that he could lift weights. And the coach was so impressed that he encouraged him to take up the sport. And in fact, he was so successful at this that in 1956 and in 1960, he represented England as a weight trainer on the weightlifting team. He was actually the captain of the team. I think it's very easy to want to put out of our minds what hatred can do. It's not pleasant to talk about or to think about. But unless we really understand what we have in common as human beings, and that we're all related to each other, that hatred just multiplies and grows, and we repeat the same problems over and over. I hope that the reader will sense that despite very adverse conditions, sometimes deadly conditions, that the human spirit is capable of enormous triumph, even against terrible odds. I hope that they'll want to share these stories, and that these will have some impact on their own personal lives. They have on mine, and I hope they do for the reader too.